everyone, and welcome on the podcast Stories from War. So I am here with Johnny FD. Thank you, Johnny, for joining in. So Today it's going to be a little bit of a different episode because Johnny is going to tell us not his story, but the stories of some people he met along the way. And these stories need to be heard. So thank you, Johnny, for stepping in and sharing your stories.
Yeah, when I spoke to you last time and you asked me to share my story, I was happy to do it, but I realized there's so many Ukrainians who maybe don't speak English well that have really meaningful stories to share. And those are the stories I really wanted to get out there. You know, as a American, resident of Kyiv, that's one very small sliver, but there's literally millions of Ukrainians who have been affected from this war. And I was just one day just jotting down some notes of people I remember, looking at some old photos, and I remember their stories, and I wish they were able to come on and share their stories. But first, you have the language barrier, but second, I think a lot of them, maybe don't even want to relive that moment and talk about it. So I'm going to share them kind of anonymously, or semi-anonymously on their behalf. And the first one was actually, I guess we'll do this in order, on February 25th last year, one day after the war started, I, along with a few million people from Ukraine, had fled the country. We didn't know what was going to happen. And at that time, it was, chaos. It was trains, cars, and I have countless friends who got stuck for 2 or 3 days in line in the car, sleeping in the car, eating just whatever snacks that they had for 3 days. Luckily, most of them were smart enough to bring water. I went by train, and the train was very mixed. There was lots of families on there, and one of the first people I want to share is there was a family. It was a husband, a wife, and a young child, a young daughter. And they were next to us in the queue to leave the country into Hungary. And I didn't really think about it too much. I had thought maybe that they would stop men from leaving the country. But it was 24 hours into the war. It was chaos. Nobody really knew what was happening. And it turns out that the reason why these men were in line wasn't to go to Hungary. It was just to make sure their wife and their child left okay.
So they were coming with their wife and kids to make sure they were going to the destination because the wives and kids wanted to stay, I suppose.
Maybe that was one of the reasons. Maybe they just wanted to make sure that they actually got out of the country okay, and they just wanted to spend every last moment with them. It was very traumatizing for me, just in that split second where I feel like I got to know this family, being in line with them for 3 hours, crossing the whole country with them. And at the very last second, when we were showing our passports, the man waved goodbye. And he turned around and went back, towards Kyiv. And the mother and the child, they were crying, and I was like, that's when it really hit me. That was the first moment I realized this is very serious, and I'm very lucky to have a U.S. passport and be able to leave. But at the same time, I'm very happy also that they didn't allow all the Ukrainian men to leave, because first, there needs to be someone to defend the country, but second, there needs to be a reason for people to come back. Because I feel like if all the families left, including the husbands and the brothers and all the men, and they moved to Canada, moved to Europe, and they got new jobs, had a new home, a new apartment, even when the war ends, it'd be very hard for them to decide to go back. But if there was one family member that stayed behind, they had that connection and reason to go back.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. Have you ever met any family who said, you know what, we're going to leave and we're not going to come back? Because I have the feeling that this war has actually sparked such love for Ukraine, but even in the heart of Ukrainians, like something was taken from them. And
Mhm.
maybe you do not realize before your country is in danger, but when this is happening, even though you have to go away for some time, you want to go back. I have never met any refugee here who said, I don't want to go back.
So before the war, I would say the vast majority of Ukrainians I knew dreamt about living abroad one day.
Yeah.
And when they were forced to, it became a different story.
Exactly. Yeah.
It was a combination of first, going against your will, going during a bad time, but then secondly, also, they realized maybe it's not as great as they had imagined it to be. It wasn't like the Hollywood movies. Life wasn't perfect, but at the same time, the salaries are definitely higher in the West. And I don't think anybody would be willing to move back to Ukraine and earn a standard, $300 or $400 a month when they're used to making $3,000 a month in the West. You just can't do it. Secondly, I would say out of the, let's say 30 Ukrainians that I knew pretty well when I was living here before the war, probably a third of them are never going to come back. And it's sad. A lot of them have told me, they've gotten jobs, they're sending money to their relatives here, but I can tell that they don't have any plans to come back. Definitely to visit. But I think it's a very taboo topic actually right now. Hopefully things will change if this war ends very quickly. But the longer it goes on, I think the less likelihood somebody's actually going to move back.
Yeah. I hear you. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but the way I see it is you might have some people who find some opportunities abroad, but are going to send the money to help rebuild Ukraine.
Yeah. I think a lot of them will send money or they will visit, but, they themselves, especially if they have a good job, they have a new apartment, new car, new husband. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of divorces since the war started. Just people have been away from each other for so many months. War is very stressful. It's hard for everybody. The second story I want to share is, it was actually in Budapest. From the first days of the war, I started attending anti-war rallies and protests. And Hungary's never really been a very pro-Ukrainian country for political reasons. So when we attended the protest, it was really hard to get Ukrainian flags. And I had to search the entire city and looking for, any semblance of it. And I finally found one at a military store. And it was a really nice, quality flag. And I was so excited. I brought it to the protest. And probably within 2 minutes of me being there, this girl, she's probably, in her 30s. She looked at me and she said in Ukrainian, where did you buy the flag? And I was trying to explain to her, and she started to cry. And she asked if she can hold it, and I gave it to her. And at first I just assumed she wanted to just take a photo with it or just hold it during the rally. And she wrapped it around herself like a cape, and she was just so happy to hold that flag in. And she was, I think normally Ukrainians are very, they're very prideful. They would never ask for anything, but for her, it meant so much to her to have it.
Yeah.
And there's no way I could have said no to her, Yeah. So, it was a little bit, disappointing that I couldn't buy another one. I couldn't easily get another one, but at the same time, I knew it meant to a much better place.
Yeah. Did you go to a lot of these protests over there in Budapest?
Yeah. I've been to them. Basically they had them every week for the first few months of the war. And in some cities, like in Krakow, they were daily. And I would go every time I had a free time. I was doing a lot of volunteering work in the beginning. But I would try to take an hour or two out of my day just to go show my support. And I was very impressed seeing some people that they were there every day, like they never missed a day, for months and months and months.
Yeah. And how is it now? I mean, we are almost 1 year into it.
Yeah, I mean, I understand, it cannot be weekly anymore.
Hmm.
Like it's one of those things where Western support is vital, which is why it's
Hmm.
important to show what's happening and remind people. But at the same time, I understand that,
Yeah.
people can't spend 24 hours a day, even if you're Ukrainian, like you can't spend
Hmm.
your whole life stressed and worry about it. You have to try to have a semblance of a normal life. The people who I remember, someone asking, how's it that the day after her son was liberated, that there were so many flags? Like, where do they get them from?
Hmm.
And it was really cool seeing some like videos of people like babushkas, little grandmas, digging up jars from their
Hmm.
backyard with
Exactly.
their
I
yeah
remember these videos. Yeah. Yeah. They had to hide it. They had to hide their flags, but they never,
yeah
I mean, it's a risk. It's a risk to keep a Ukrainian flag if you're in occupied territory, occupied by Russia, and they were risking their lives, but it was still important to keep it. And that was for me quite a big lesson. I've never been much of a nationalist, or the flag didn't mean much to me until like I saw these videos, and you're like, okay, now I understand. Your flag means something. Yeah.
yeah 100% absolutely. I think the flag and kind of national pride isn't even really that necessary to show off, and it's almost pompous to show off when your country is doing super well and it's peaceful. Then it's kind of it's like, why are you being so prideful? But when your country's suffering
Hmm.
or fighting, it's very, very important. Speaking of suffering, there was a
Hmm.
family that was living in Mariupol during the occupation. Actually, it's still occupied now, but in the beginning, they there was still communication. I mean, luckily there's still internet and you can use VPNs and things like that.
Hmm.
And I actually had met this the the daughter. She's 35, and I met her somewhere. I don't know how. Maybe she was actually. I think she was a viewer of my YouTube videos even before the
Okay.
war, and we were just somehow connected on Instagram. And I remember just messaging every single Ukrainian person that I had a previous connection with, whether it was just
Hmm.
online or if they were like my barber or like my, window cleaner or like my, coffee shop person, just anyone who had a connection with. And I would ask, how are you? Is there anything you
Hmm.
need? You
Hmm.
know, because I knew on one hand, unfortunately, there were a lot of fake profiles popping up, and a lot of scams popping up,
Hmm.
either from the Russian propaganda side, but also just, in general, people trying to divert, humanitarian, like
Yeah.
donations.
Yeah.
So I figured if I had known them before the war and I knew they were a good person,
Hmm.
then that was the best way I can vet someone. And this particular girl, she said that her mother got hit by shrapnel. They needed to leave. They wanted to know if I could find them a cheap apartment in Kyiv to rent because they didn't have a
Okay.
lot of money.
Yeah.
And I said, actually, I am not in the country now. I have a lockbox. When you like, I can let you live
Hmm.
there for free. And I said, like, in my mind, from Mariupol to Kyiv before the war, it was a pretty short journey. You can get there the same day. You
Hmm.
can take a train, you can take a bus, and within 7 or 8 hours you're there. And I kind of, I said, yeah, I can be ready by tonight. Like, what time do you want to come? And she says, like, Johnny, like, the Russians won't let us travel
Yeah.
through the border. We're gonna have to go around. And by
Around.
around, yes.
Yeah.
So the way that she did it, her mom, and then her father after, they had to first go to Donetsk, which is
Okay.
also occupied, but it's on the border of Russia. And to do that, basically, she scheduled like a surgery for her mother's leg, went to Donetsk, got their operation, and then went across the border into actual Russia. Somehow found
Okay.
a bus or marshuka or something to, I think, St. Petersburg, then to Moscow, and then from
No.
there they had run out of money and there was no way for anyone to send money. So luckily she found a partisan, like someone who's living in Russia that actually was trying to help Ukrainians. So they exist. I hope these people get recognized after the war. The kind of the underground railroad helpers. And they gave her enough. I think they bought them bus tickets to Estonia.
Okay.
So if anyone wants to look at a map, to go from Mariupol to Donetsk to St. Petersburg to Moscow to Estonia already takes like 3 or 4 days. And from Estonia,
and that's crazy.
Yeah, it's like the longest possible route. And from Estonia, they had to go through Warsaw, cross back into Ukraine, and then do the 10-hour journey to Kyiv.
Okay.
And
the whole family, because the mother had a surgery on her leg and she did the whole travel.
Yeah, so she can barely walk. The father was very old. He also had some health problems, so I saw them come through my front door because I have security cameras on my front door. And I was so anxious for them to come and see if they were safe, that I was watching this camera. And when they came in, they sat down on my little a poof, like where you take off your shoes.
Yeah.
And they sat there for probably 20, 25 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And what's crazy is I have, my living room is just through the door, and, I have a couch, I have chairs, but they just sat on that poof and just were so relieved and so exhausted after this crazy long journey, knowing that they're finally in Kyiv, that they're safe. And, eventually I turned off the cameras to give them some privacy. She called me and said, hey, everything's okay. And they ended up living there for, I think, about 2 months or so, until they found their own apartments. Luckily, through some of the GoFundMe funds that I had raised, I used that to pay for their next apartment for the first couple months to get them set up. So they were okay, but I really felt like, man, this is just one of the 100,000 families that had their lives ruined in Mariupol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's hard to say it, but I guess they are one of the lucky ones. They are still alive. They managed to get out, and I bet not everybody can say that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
How was they today?
So yeah, they're living in an apartment, like in the outskirts of Kyiv. So luckily the landlord was pretty nice, and they didn't charge them too much for rent, because they knew they didn't have that much money. And there was another Ukrainian organization that helped them get simple things like pots and pans and clothes and things like that. So there is, I don't know about now. This was many months ago. Maybe it should be even better now, but who knows if the aid has run out. But there was always ways for people to get help if they wanted. But it was never, it was always scary, I think, for people to leave places like Mariupol, that are occupied, or now in Bakhmut or before in Kherson, to the unknown, because they think they've heard that there's help, but at the same time, they can leave, they can stay in their apartment that they have everything, or and risk being killed by a Russian occupier, or by artillery, or by missile, or they can risk it all to go somewhere safe like Kyiv or Lviv, but then not know what kind of help they're going to get, how quickly they're going to get it, and if it's going to be like a shared dorm or something that's going to be very uncomfortable versus having their own home. And
it's extremely difficult to do that when you have reached a certain age, because so your friend was 35, I think you said, and her parents were older, and plus with some like physical issues and not being able to walk properly. So I cannot imagine the travel they had to go through and the pressure. And also they had nothing, like, as you were saying, they ran out of money. So you have to go, and you have no idea how it's going to get. Like,
I think a lot of Ukrainians have actually got stuck in Russia. Because they're basically, during the occupation, there was an option. You can either stay you can die, or you can, say basically you can go to Russia and just say, give up your Ukrainian life. And I'm sure that there was, a small percentage of people who are like, yeah, I've always wanted to be, part of Russia, but it was a very small percentage. The majority of the people were like, okay, I want to get on the Ukrainian bus, but it's full, so I can either die or I can take one of the seats on the Russia bus.
Yeah.
And once you're there, you can't say anything. You can't be against the war. You have to just accept whatever life they give you, which often is, a very terrible life east of Russia, where they're trying to repopulate, or in Siberia where nobody wants to live, but they just need it. They need workers there. They need people there. So, I think they were one of the lucky ones that they were able to leave. But I can imagine there's a lot of people, they don't really have any other choice. So they're just like, okay, I guess I'm stuck here, or I die.
Yeah. Do they still have contact with people in Mariupol, or it's very difficult to be in contact at the moment?
I asked, who else I can help there. And actually, I helped one of her friends and their family get out as well. But after that, she said, honestly, Johnny, like, if anyone who hasn't already left, it's not worth trying to force them. It's their own option. Like, we give them plenty of chances. So who knows? So nowadays it's kind of like the same. I mean, to be honest, Bakhmut, for months, I have friends who are, evacuation volunteers, and they were risking their lives trying to get people out of their homes into safety, and people refused to go for whatever reason. And at this point, end of February, where it's a very, very dangerous time, they've basically said, Johnny, like, I'm not going to risk my life again to go for the sixth time to the same house, because they finally changed their mind. It's a tough situation, and I understand it from both sides. And of course, Russia is the only one to blame to even put people in this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. It's a tricky question. I think one of the videos that hit me the most was one of Brandon's video. I don't know if you saw this one. He went to rescue a babushka who stayed there. And actually, a few days prior, a team of foreigner volunteers went and got killed trying to reach this babushka. And Brandon asked her, why did you choose to stay? Because we have some good people who died to try to reach you. And then she shared her story. And her story was so heartbreaking. Like, she had 2 sons and 1 daughter. 1 daughter was gone, so that was good. But one of her son joined the military and died, the Ukrainian military. He died in Bakhmut. Her second son disappeared from one day to another. Suddenly he was gone. No one knew where he was. So she was staying behind in hope that her son would maybe show up to be there for him. You know what I mean? So you're like, oh my God, this is an impossible choice.
Yeah.
It's impossible. Everywhere you lose,
Yeah. And I think I said this on the last interview, but I sincerely hope that nobody ever has to make these choices. Because you don't know how you would react, and I don't want anyone to ever have to make those choices. This is a memory I have of kind of also towards the beginning. It was actually March 15th. I looked at the photos to check the date, and this was one of the days that I decided to go to the border between Hungary and Poland. I think it was Poland or Hungary and Ukraine, when people were first coming into the country. I know it was Hungary, and there was getting less and less people leaving, because within one month, or I guess 3 weeks, from that point, there was room. Like, people could leave the country, but a lot of people had chosen to stay for whatever reason. But what was really remarkable to me was or memorable to me was there was one woman with a very young child. The child was probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 or something. And she was still standing on the platform after everybody had got off and changed trains or, gone to a car or something. And I used my translator to ask, what is she doing? Or like, what is she waiting for? What does she need? And they said that she wanted to go back to Ukraine. That her husband had forced her on the train to leave with the child.
Yeah.
But she didn't know anyone in Hungary. She didn't, she didn't want to be away from him. And everybody was trying to convince her, like, look, you're safe now. Like, your husband sent you here for a reason. Like, there's, we have programs, there's places you can stay. Like, what do you need, And my friend Dan that I went with, he handed her a few, like, something like 35 or 40,000 Hungarian forint, which I actually didn't know how much that is, and she probably didn't know either. But it was a pretty significant amount of money, like a few $100s. And she looked at it and she's like, what am I going to do with this? Like, I don't even know what this is. And she put it in her pocket. She said, thank you. But she was like, I have no idea like what I'm doing in this country. So she, against everybody's wishes, decided to go back to Ukraine. She was just waiting for the next train. And after like an hour of trying to convince her, everybody said, it's her decision. We can't force her to stay. And that's when I decided, okay, you know what? I'm going to give her some hryvnia, some Ukrainian money, so she can, she can have it when she gets back. And I just had 1,000 hryvnia on me, which is like $30. It wasn't a big amount of money, but she was so grateful and so happy because she says, without it, she didn't know how she was going to get back to her village. So now she can take a taxi. And it was ironic to me that me and my friend Dan were laughing about it, saying like he gave her so much more, but the Hungarian forint was useless to her, but the hryvnia to her was a big deal. Yeah.
It is terrible. And whenever I think, okay, why do people stay? There is always a story behind it. There is always a heartbreaking reason why they decided to stay, and that's going to affect them, that's going to affect their families, that's going to affect maybe like volunteers and stuff. And as you said, there is no right thing to do. Everything is difficult. Of course it's better to leave, but it's not easy for anyone. And I think that's maybe something in the West we do not realize, because it's so easy for us to travel. And you were talking about your American passport. I have a French passport. It's really pretty good. And in Europe, you can go wherever you want, really. You don't really have any border. You can drive to Spain or you can drive to Germany. You just see, like a little sign, welcome, you're in Germany now. That's it. That's not a big deal. But for like some people, especially coming from the village and who has never, ever traveled, and they have to leave everything behind. And as you said, you have no idea where you're going to go, why you're forced to do it. It's extremely difficult. And I have few stories of refugees that arrived here in south of France. And the way, like once you have crossed the border, it's another challenge. Like you are moved from place to place, and sometimes you can have a bad experience of, going to some people who are being a bit funny about things or who do not really understand your position. That's extremely difficult as well. So there is no easy choice. There is no easy choice.
Yeah. Absolutely. I've heard some stories, people just not getting along, with their host families, especially after the first month or so. And sometimes, it's really nobody's fault, where the host families, in the beginning, they were very excited to share their house. They said, oh, we have an extra room, come live with us. But then, in one story that I remember particularly, after the first few weeks, that they were upset at the refugees, saying, you don't want to have dinner with us, you don't want to be part of our family, you're just in your room all the time checking Telegram to see what's happening in Ukraine. And she was trying to explain, like, look, I'm depressed, I don't know what you want me to do, but like I'm just like, I'm unhappy, I'm not here to to entertain you. I also understand from the host family's point of view, just having this like depressing soul in your house, just draining energy from you as well. But it's really not her fault. It's a hard situation. Luckily, there was a option for her to find another family, and they explained the situation in the beginning. In the beginning, they said, like, she's very introverted, but she just needs a place to stay. And then it was okay. But by far the best situation, and unfortunately not everybody has this connection, but I would say a lot of the people, at least I knew, they had at least a friend of a friend or a relative or someone with some kind of connection, that when they moved to that country, they felt a little bit connected. My friend Engin and Elena, they're my really good friends from Kharkiv. Their parents and babushka refused to leave Kharkiv for the longest time, even though it was really dangerous to stay. And I don't remember which attack it was or what happened, but after one day they said, you know what, like, Kharkiv is too dangerous, we have to go. And this was against everybody's wishes, because babushka was really old. She was, I think, already almost 80, but just fragile. She had already lived through one war in her life, World War II, and she wanted to die in peace in her house, but they said, we have to take you, sorry. And luckily I was in Hungary still at the time. This was probably maybe a few weeks or the first month into the war, and I was able to meet them at the train station. So at least they had a familiar face, that someone they already knew. I was able to spend a few days with them to get them kind of settled, and then put them on another train to go to Austria, where they were going to be living with a family friend, or like a friend of a friend's family or something like that. And actually, I went to go visit them about a month or two ago. I went to this village in Austria, and this family is really nice. They were he's a doctor, and their actual kids are over 18, so they moved out of the house, but they have this giant house. So they have this like long Austrian farmhouse, where on the left side you have one kitchen with like a living room and the bedrooms, and then on the right hand side you have basically almost the same thing. So it's almost like they have their own separate apartments. And they've been living there since the war started, and they're very happy living there. They're really taken care of. So ended up being a very good experience. This doctor's been very generous, but they also have a lot of separation, which makes them allowed to feel like they have their own home, instead of being in someone else's house, which I think it would be difficult.
Yeah. Like, if you want to be a host, there is one thing that you need to have, is no expectation. You cannot have any expectation, because everybody's going to react differently. Everybody's going to have different needs. Some people are going to need to talk about what's happening. Some people are going to need to absolutely not talk about it. Some people are going to need some space and be alone. Some people are going to need to travel around to see something else, and to just get out of this, like constant reminder of, all the horrors that are happening in your countries. And so my friend Alisa here, she had some issues with some hosts at some point. And from what I understand, and that's my opinion, it felt like the host was expecting them to be always sad and not be happy, because some terrible things were happening. And I have seen some people, some hosts, because I was on all these French groups to host people, saying that some Ukrainians were acting as if they were on holiday and going around places. And you're like, But that's good, actually. I mean, what do you want them to cry all day forever? I mean, like it's crazy.
Yeah.
So no expectation, no
Yeah.
expectation. That's it.
That's actually a really good point where on one hand, like I understand from kind of a layman's point of view where you see, refugee at the beach and like, what are they doing? They should be, the protest, or they should be, volunteering. It's like it's been 1 year. Like you like you can't do this 24 hours a day. You will die. Like you will, like, mentally, you'll
Yeah.
physically just collapse. Like you need to have a somewhat of a normal life. And for a lot of them, this is their, I mean, it was their dream to move somewhere to Europe or go somewhere by the ocean or by the sea. And I'm happy that they can enjoy it. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them, they're hoping that this war will end soon, and they'll have at least some good memories of their time in France, and not just them crying in a basement, every day. There is also a little bit of resentment even from the guys that I know here in Ukraine. I just had dinner with a friend last night, and he was half joking, but you can tell he's a little bit upset. He's saying, I see, like, he can't leave because he's a guy, and he says, like, I see all the girls that I know on their Instagram, they're posting pictures from the beach, or they're posting photos of them at the Eiffel Tower or somewhere, and like, these guys are resentful, and they're jealous, and they're upset. But at the same time, you know, I speak to my female friends, and they post these nice photos, but that's like 1% of their life. The rest of it, they're struggling. Everybody's suffering. Like nobody's happy that this is happening. So I think it's just hard for everybody, but it doesn't mean that people can't try to have a normal life and enjoy life. It's not their fault. Like, like if anyone wants to blame anybody, like they should only blame Russia for attacking.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is also an element when you're forced to live abroad, like the men has to sacrifice themselves somehow, and make sure their family is safe. And it's better, I'm sure it's better also to know, okay, my wife, my daughter, my son, they're okay. And somehow they are in a nice place. They can have a little bit of comfort, like maybe going to the beach here and then. That's good. Like it's better for the men that stay behind to know that, well, the people who were forced to go abroad are actually okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I really hope that families will stay together throughout this, but I know the longer time passes, the more fights people will have about about being away, not seeing each other, about money, about what they're doing. And I know there's been a lot of divorces.
Okay.
It's sad. Like some of the guys that I hang out with, they kind of joke about it because it's so common now, but it's kind of unspoken where, if your girlfriend or your wife has been away now for 11 or 12 months, they might meet someone else, especially because, there's only so many conversations you're going to have on the phone and keep the connection when your lives are so different. Maybe on the guy's side, there might be resentment, that he is either fighting or he's suffering, and she's having fun. Maybe there's jealousy happening.
Yeah.
Who knows what it is, but it's like, this war has ruined a lot of families in so many different ways. Aside from the houses and the lives that they've taken, the next topic I wanted to talk about, the next person, actually, this was in April. This is when I had decided to go back to Ukraine. I was out for maybe a month and a half, and I was miserable. I even though I was safe and I was in Europe. At first I was in Budapest, and I went to Poland, and I went to a few places, and I was trying to decide myself, where to live. Luckily, I could have moved anywhere. I could have moved back to Thailand, or I could move back to the US. but I was miserable. Like I also just I wasn't happy because even though, yeah, I had photos in front of some beautiful buildings and in Hungary, or at um the baths of Budapest,
Hmm.
that was me trying to clear my mind and trying to not think about what's happening, even for a few hours. But at night, every day when I'm checking what's happening in Ukraine, I was miserable, and that's when I said, okay, I'll go back to Ukraine in April. And one of my first trips to one of the previously occupied areas was to Hostomel. This was where Russia first had come in, and I remember I was making a video for my YouTube channel showing some of the destroyed houses, and there was one that I walked away from the main street, which I wasn't supposed to do because it was dangerous
Yeah.
still at the time. There was mines. There was, like they didn't know if there were still Russian soldiers left. But I saw, all these destroyed houses down the street, and I decided to go and just film it and show it. And I was literally showing one destroyed house when a man walked out of it, and he was throwing out trash. And I asked, like, do you live here? And he says, yes, that's my home.
Oh my
And
God.
yeah, and then he shows me and he points to me his car that he was so proud of. And he says, yeah, and this is my car. And this car was under a pile of destroyed wood, and it was like a garage that had collapsed. But he said to me in the most confident voice, he said, but I will repair it.
Wow.
And he was so sure. And actually, ironically, he was wearing a one of those mechanic t-shirts, like Pennzoil or something. And I actually looked at him and I was like, actually, this guy will fix his car, you know? And that could have been it. But then I asked, I said, is it okay if I see like the inside of your house? And he's like, yeah, sure, come in. And there was plastic on the window, well, where the windows used to be. There was like a hole in the ceiling, and his wife was sitting there, reading a book or something. And they said, oh, come in. And they showed me all the damage, but they were living in that house still.
Mm-hmm.
And I thanked them. I walked outside, and I just started crying. I was trying to keep it together to like talk about what had just happened. And it was the only time, or at least the first time I had ever in 10 years of having a YouTube channel, like cried in a video. And I just couldn't hold it in. And I was like, man, this is just one family out of thousands who've had their lives destroyed. And I just happened to have walked by and met this person. It wasn't prearranged. It wasn't anything. It was just, I just walked about down a street, and there they were.
Do you think, like, because you were crying because of the magnitude of all these broken situations, and like basically Russians destroyed all these lives and all this home for nothing? And do you think it was all this that was affecting you, or the fact that he was quite proud to tell you he's gonna fix it?
I think it was a little bit of both. I mean, to be honest, the first time I cried was on February 26th. It was the day, the first morning I woke up after the war had started, and I was in a rented apartment in Budapest, in an Airbnb, and I was completely safe. I was already in Hungary, but it had taken me 48 hours to really process what had happened. I was in so much disbelief that Russia would actually attack and invade, their neighbor in 2022. That, if you had asked me anytime before February 24th, I would have said no. I said, like, there's like almost zero chance that Russia would actually invade. It's stupid. We lived in a civilized society now. There's no reason for someone to start a war. They're showing off they're flexing their military, but there's a zero chance they're going to attack. And when it really happened, it hit me the morning of the 26th, when I had woken up, my first day of safety, I remember I sat down on the toilet and I just could not help but crying. I sat there for 20 minutes. Maybe I was embarrassed. My friend was in the other room, and that was the first time I was really alone. And it just really came out, for me. But in Hostomel, I think it was a different. It was different. It was first seeing, the devastation, realizing how lucky I was. I think that was really the first time I realized, like how privileged I was, to have left early, but also to have the passport and to have the savings to even leave. These people are making this is their whole life, and if they leave, they have nothing else. Seeing the strength and resilience of this family, and seeing that they were in good spirits, that they were optimistic, showing the Ukrainian soul. It was just a huge combination of everything, all my emotions, thinking, wow, like it's real, but at the same time, like the Ukrainians are even stronger than I had ever imagined.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's a strength you discover in very, very hard times. And I wish they didn't have to realize how strong they were. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, speaking of strength, very recently, a few weeks ago, I went to a village called Yahidne. It's in the Chernihiv region. And actually, now I realized that there's a Time magazine article about this village. They call it the village that was under occupation. But when I went, I actually had not heard about it. There's so many stories like this where Russia, on their way to Kyiv or on their way to Odessa or on their way to another major city that they're trying to capture, ended up occupying a village. And for people who don't understand why they would do that, it's because in Ukraine, for whatever reason, all the roads are built. This village is built around all the roads. I think what it was is, many years ago, it was a small road, and then they decided to make those bigger. So instead of building a separate highway or separate, place for cars to drive, they would just expand whatever small roads there were. So you always go through villages when you're driving, and tanks and other military vehicles, even though they can go through a field, it just takes a lot longer. It can get stuck during winter. So they actually drive on the roads just like cars would. So to get to Kharkiv or get to Kyiv, they have to pass through villages. And at some point, they stop to either regroup, to occupy it, so they can have food, they can sleep, they can turn it into kind of a camp, a barrack, and then they would fight from there. And in this particular village, they took all the residents, which is about 350 people, and they basically stuffed them in the basement of a school. And I was there and I went into this basement. One of the survivors, he actually gave a tour of it, and it's dark. It's so humid, and it's so cold that after 15 minutes, I couldn't stand it. I needed, to get out and get some air. But these people were in this little basement for 25 days. And they were only let out for maybe an hour a day to use the bathroom, to stretch, because it was so crowded that people couldn't even straighten their arms. People were just sitting basically on top of each other or laying on top of each other. A lot of people died just being there, but in the basement, due to either health complications or whatever it is. and a lot of them were killed as well, if they were, you know, either tried to escape, or even if it looked like they're trying to escape. There were stories where, somebody would want a little bit more privacy when they're using the bathroom. So they walked a little bit further than they were supposed to, and they were shot. So in this basement, it was hell. Like it's I have a video on my vlog about it. You can watch that, or you can find the Time magazine article. But
I will put all the link down below, because on the Time magazine we can actually see like a picture with people in it. It's just horrendous. It's just horrifying.
And I had met a few of the villagers. The man, I think he just does it just to show the world, what had happened. Like, he didn't charge any money for the tour or anything. He just wanted to show what they went through. So Russia, will have to suffer for this, like they did. But I also spoke to a few of the women who were, part of this 350 people. And the hardest part was, so we were with a journalist from Japan. And on one hand, they understand it's important for the world to know what Russia has done, and to spread the message. But on the other hand, like, imagine if you had lived through, such trauma, and every day or every week, journalists are coming to ask you to relive the moment, asking you these details, that people were, months after the war now, people were so tired, like they didn't want to talk about it anymore. And ironically, I told her the best thing you could do is actually not to ask any questions, but just let them talk. And she tried it. And there was one woman, who at first, the first thing she said was, I don't want to talk about it, but it was very difficult. And all of us just stayed silent, and we just nodded. We just like, was there. And then she just started to talk about it on her own. She started to talk about, like, her friends that died during that time, but how difficult it was, how uncomfortable it was, how dark it was, how they had written on the wall, like, how many days that they were there. It was almost like, I mean, it's exactly what you would imagine a movie to be like if somebody was trapped in a basement. Like, you would start screaming on the wall. They made a calendar on the wall just to try to keep track of the days. They had another little tally on the wall that they had written on about how many people they had, how many people died every day. It was really crazy. And the only kind of bright side of the story was there were some organizations that had come in to help them rebuild their homes after they were destroyed. And one of the kind of grandmas there, the babushkas there, she was so proud, saying like, "Oh yeah, my house down the street. If you want to come take a look, it's fixed now." And we actually didn't go, because if it's already fixed, like, and we didn't have any before photos, it was kind of an anti-highlight for my video. But it was nice to hear that they were being repaired.
Yeah. I have one thing I would like to say about when you have to live through such trauma. Everybody will have different reactions to it, and I cannot help but think about, I've watched quite a bit of documentaries about World War II, and when it's over, it's not over. You know what I mean? Like, you have to process the trauma and then rebuild on that. And a lot of people who survived the camps, the Nazi camps, and the Holocaust, they didn't want to talk about it. Like, there was a huge period of time that lasts sometimes for decades, because it was such horror that they didn't want to share it. And even though you can understand for historical reasons, for also processing somehow, there is a component that you have to voice it, but you have to voice it according to your own agenda. And that's not something like you can decide for someone. Someone has to want to talk about it when they are ready, and maybe some will never be ready to talk about it. You know what I mean? Like it's difficult. And these stories that you share, I've never heard about it. We all heard about Bucha, Irpin, and I'm sure there are gonna be many, many more horrific stories that we will probably not hear about of such things happening. So thank you for sharing that, because I think it's important to still talk about this is war. This is how it looks like.
Yeah, and this is why I wanted to come back on and share these stories, because probably 90% of the stories I shared, these people don't speak English very well or at all. I also don't know that they would even want to talk about it. But I think 100% of them are happy that I'm sharing their story, so that other people in the world can realize what Russia has done to their country. And every day I wish I spoke the language better so I could have deeper conversations, because every person here has stories to share. I'm not always going to be with the translator, and even then it's not as it's less personal than being able to just have a casual conversation with someone. I remember when I was in Kharkiv, and I was at this market that was completely destroyed. I mean, like it looked like something out of I don't know, like a zombie movie or something. Like things were burnt down, things were crumbling, and we're walking through. It was even difficult to even walk without tripping on something and hurting yourself. And when we turn the corner, this is maybe 20 minutes into this video I was making, I randomly see some people with grocery bags, and I said, what are they doing here? Like why are you in this destroyed zone? This is a Saltika and Kharkiv in the north. And I realized out of all the destroyed shops, and we had probably walked by, let's say 30 or 40 destroyed supermarkets and pharmacies and pet food stores, there was one shop that was still open, and they were selling essentials, milk, eggs, bread, cookies. And I had to ask one of the people coming out of the shop. I said, like how are you surviving? Cockfish and variety. Like, and she says, it's difficult, but we need to eat. Like we need to survive.
Yeah. How do they manage to still get some supplies? And I don't know. It's incredible. And this is in these moments that you think that humans are really, really resilient, like, and strong, like way more than we can imagine. We are very comfortable, but if hits a fan, we can adjust. But I wish no one had to do that. Really.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I'm in Lviv now, and staying at a friend's house, and walking around here, even though it's still in Ukraine, it's completely different than being in any of the areas that had more damage or more, that was closer to the suffering. Even Kyiv, like in Kyiv, things seem pretty normal, but at the same time, I think everyone there has a very close connection to a close call of something happened to them, or something had happened to their friends, their family. While in Lviv, because it's so far away and it's basically almost the border of the EU, life seems so normal here. Like it seems like everything's going, very smoothly. And I'm sure a lot of people here also have stories where they've suffered, but also a lot of people, really, like, they've only seen it on TV. They've only heard of it, like, they don't have any personal connections to someone who lived in any of those areas. So even within Ukraine, it's there's different levels of connection to the actual war itself.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's possible for Ukrainians to sometimes have a little bit of a break and travel a bit in safer zones, at least to just be able to regroup. Like for your mental health, how do you compute and how do you keep sane? It's crazy difficult.
Well, that's why, we all need to take a break. So,
that's why you're here.
Yeah. But yeah, it was really good talking to you. I'm glad we had recorded this and I'm able to share these stories to everyone. I encourage everyone to share stories of people who don't have a voice. I think it's really important. So thank you for what you're doing and creating this platform.
Thank you so much, Johnny, for sharing. And thank you so much for all the families and the people you helped through all your action, whether it's raising money or giving your apartment or whatever. Like, it's amazing. And you're an amazing person. So thank you, Johnny. Really.
Merci, diakuyu.